My name is Jasahn Larsosa, and I'm running for Detroit mayor.
Please share your Detroit background and relationship to Detroit. Your history of being a Detroiter.
So I'm born and raised here in Detroit. I like to say that I'm from Joy Road. It's an established neighborhood. I went to McFarland Elementary School. I went to Murray Wright High School. I went to Ann Arbor Trail Middle School. My connection to Detroit has been um, one. I think that is common with a lot of other folks who grew up like me in the city. I was a hood rat, staying close to four corners in the neighborhood, oftentimes, except when trouble, quite frankly, took me out, which was quite often as a youngster. I also share that experience, I would say, with a lot of my peers. But Detroit through and through. My mother was born and raised here after her parents migrated here from the South. I mentioned that trouble took me away, but quite frankly, my hopes for the city and for my family brought me back. And Detroit is in my veins.
Tell the story of what led you to run for office.
Yeah, so this is a story that I've been telling a lot. The public office has never been an aspiration of mine. I'm not sure that I'm super excited about the prospect right now, but I did recognize it as an opportunity to elevate a new kind of narrative about the city of Detroit and the people who live here, and to offer new inspiration to Black people who live here and brown people who live here, and particularly young people who live here. And I'd say equally important, to pursue a clean, safe, and prosperous neighborhoods agenda that I believe can be executed through the expertise of that comes from the lived experience that I have and that I share with a lot of people who also grew up and continue to live in the neighborhoods of Detroit. So the office of mayor in particular, there's a lot swirling around that, but without creating unnecessary divisions, I think that I just want to be as plain as I can and reflecting back on 2013 when there was a relatively unknown friend of the city from Livonia who offered himself as mayor, and this was right on the heels of the controversy surrounding former Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick, and Black people voters were quite openly saying that we needed to do everything we could to get Black people out of positions of power here in this city. And to be honest, that disturbed me. I thought I can understand why we've taken this position. I didn't agree with it, but I understood. I mean, this is textbook internalized oppression. And I wanted to address it. And so I began to work with young people in that year who just wanted to have their voices heard. They were taking street corners and saying, please don't give up on me, trying to convey the message to grandparents and parents that the decision you make today is going to have an impact on the legacy that we establish for tomorrow, and ultimately what we believe in ourselves as young people. And these are teenagers out on the street corners. And this was the first political campaign that I was formally ended up being involved in, the Benny Napoleon campaign. I ended up endorsing him as the first person I ever endorsed politically, because I thought that the endorsement was necessary to help level the playing field for Black people who believed that a Black Detroiter was not, as a Black Detroiter in particular, was not qualified to lead other Black Detroiters. And so I did endorse him, and then eventually I got some support from unions who understood that the argument that I was making would ultimately benefit their candidate, and then finally formally involved in that campaign. So fast forward to 2000 now, where are we now? 2020, 21. And our friend from Livonia, our ally, Mike Duggan, announced that he was going to go for a third term. And my initial thought was, there's a lot of narrative that needs to be corrected around this. And young people need to know that they have the ability to lead. They have to trust their roots in their city and the expertise that comes from their lived experience. And they deserve to see themselves reflected in positions of power and see themselves as change agents. And Suzanne, more than anything, professionally, I'm a community organizer. I'm a social justice advocate, and this is a social justice issue for me. And I'm not sure, or I'm convinced, so I know for a fact that had this third term not been announced, I would never have considered doing such a thing. But I thought it was worth the argument. I thought it was worth my fun, our family's free time and hard-earned, saved money But even then, after only a lot of urging from our friends and family members and folks from the community saying that we should step up and do it. Now, obviously, they had their reasons. They see a charismatic-ish, presentable black man, and I think where we come from, the belief is that you either got to be a preacher or a politician, and I rejected that notion outright on both accounts. But after I thought about it, I believed this is an opportunity for someone like me to step forward to demonstrate that we can do this, and I hope that I'm paving the way for 4 years from now or 8 years from now, young entertainers and artists and rappers and people from the city who have a strong base will step forward and lead with the belief that they can do it. So that's why.
What is your understanding of the duties of the office you are running for?
So the duties of the office of mayor, similar to the duties of my current office, it's an executive office, which means it's an implementation office. My job is to execute the policies that are laid out by the legislative body, which is the council, but also with an elevated platform. My job as a leader in a city like this is to also be a big brother and an uncle and a role model in a city and for the people who live in it. So I see myself as being, the head administrator, but also kind of uncle, big brother, and chief.
Are you familiar with and what is your position on the Detroiters' Bill of Rights?
The Detroiters' Bill of Rights, I'm 100% in favor of it. So we're talking about water being a human right. We're talking about affordable housing. I'll add to that local affordable housing based on the AMI of Detroiters and not just, in Wayne County, which, we're taking into consideration all the different cities that are around Detroit and Wayne County who have a higher AMI than we do. And their affordability is not representative of our affordability. So a lot of the Detroit Bill of Rights I'm very pleased with, and I was also pleased that a lot of the tenants were included in the proposed charter.
What is your position on water shutoffs and water affordability in the city of Detroit?
So first of all, water is a human right. And one of my first acts of mayor is to end water shutoffs. And I know that there's questions about how we're going to afford water for everybody long term, but really this is a question of principle for me. If I can walk by a house on almost any street in the city of Detroit and hear running water in the basements, if I can drive down the street and see water spewing out of the streets, it makes no sense that when residents who occupy the homes in our great city can't afford to pay water, that we turn theirs off. It's just a fundamental question. And so the first thing we have to do is commit to the ending of water shutoffs. And the second thing is, figuring out a long-term affordability plan. There's a number of different ways that we can go about that. Somebody proposed to me, and I'm not opposed to it. It's presenting a millage to the city of Detroit and asking them, us as residents, how we feel about it. My caution on millages, as somebody currently who's fundamentally opposed to millages because of the practice of unequitable tax captures on the things that we pass millages for. But if we could address that first, the ending of tax captures on human services like water or education or the public library, if we can commit to that, then I'd say let's put before the people the possibility of passing a millage that's going to pay long-term for affordable water.
How would you enhance Detroit's neighborhoods, and which neighborhoods would be your priority? Any specific one?
That's a tricky question, but it deserves a straightforward answer, so I'm going to try my best. So the question of how we strengthen Detroit's neighborhoods or give attention to Detroit's neighborhoods is not as tricky. It's an easy question. I think that we just have to commit to devoting our time and our energy and our budget process to the priorities inside the neighborhood, like cleanliness, safetyness, and prosperity. There are a few thoughts that I have on prosperity that I'll just lay out, which is to make sure that people have a place to live in the neighborhoods, which means you have to make housing affordable. And for those who want to own, you have to make ownership affordable. And, while people can argue that it's, you can get a house from the Land Bank Authority for $500 or $1,000, which is okay. But now you got to pay $90,000 to get that house renovated. And a big part of that cost is material, which is the cost of material is going up. And we could facilitate bulk purchases of material, and so that homeowners who are renovating can buy directly from us or from that mechanism put in place to bring down the cost of material. But on the other front, there are people in the neighborhoods who are quite crafty when it comes to renovation of homes. We got people in the neighborhoods, I like to point out, who can build you a house from the ground up. We call on them when we need our our drywall repaired when we got electrical problems or when we need plumbing fixed, and they're not formally allowed to participate in these renovation processes because they're uncredentialed and can't pull the permit. So we need to establish partnerships with existing unions, an apprenticeship program that allows these uncredentialed skilled trades people to participate in home renovation. I think that's going to do a few things. One, it's going to create revenue in the neighborhood right there where you live. There's a job for you to do. But two, it's also going to bring down the cost of labor. And the cost of labor is the cost of labor. So we're not talking about paying people less than what they're worth. We're saying cutting out that middle person who lives in Oakland County or wherever he or she lives that are inflating the cost of labor and then paying Detroiters $10 an hour on a contractual job and taking out for lunch for work that they couldn't do without these uncredentialed skilled people. So we want to cut them out, bring in the real skilled labor, make sure that we're partnering that within an existing apprenticeship program so that, we're ensuring that our houses aren't catching electrical fires and burning down. But I do think this is something we can do. We can do it right. And it's important to talk about that when we talk about prosperity in neighborhoods, because there's a couple sure ways that we know we're going to build wealth over time, over generations. And that's life insurance and that's home ownership. And while I can't purchase a policy for everybody, we can make home ownership more affordable. So that's just one example.
What is your plan and position on abandoned properties like schools throughout the city of Detroit owned by the Land Bank Authority?
Yeah, I think that, so there's so much that goes into that at this point that we really need to have a listening session and hear the perspective of the people who are impacted. And while this may sound cliche, it's something that's warranted and it's something that's wanted by the people in the city of Detroit. Every time that there's a building up for question, the first people who open their mouths are those of us who live around the building. We want dibs. And the feedback that we normally receive is you can't afford to do anything with it, which may be true. But, we can't talk about equity in a city without talking about repairing the harms that have been done over time, which means reparations. So, yeah, we want the school. And no, we don't have the capital necessarily required to do something with it immediately, but it's the job of me as the mayor to figure out where that those finances are going to come from. So my proposal would be to first listen to the ideas of the people and then get out there as the mayor and figure out how I'm going to pay for it, instead of trying to figure out how I'm going to reward those who've benefited from racism and oppression over time and allowing them to be the only ones to compete. And because you have the capital, because you have the networks, you somehow deserve to have all these assets that have been hard earned by the people who've lived here and stayed here.
What's your definition of police reform? Do you feel it's needed in Detroit? If so, in what ways? What is your position on facial recognition technology?
A lot of questions on public safety. Police reform for me, in general just means that we're going to make changes where changes are needed as it relates to public safety. But let me talk about the elephant in the room. People are talking about defunding the police. And then there's big argument around whether or not that's warranted. And to be clear, I think that when we say defund, we're talking about desegregate, demilitarize, and reallocate funding to the places that are they're most needed. And for starters, I'm going to say that some of those places that they're most needed are within the police department. Police officers need better training. They need to know how to interact in the community. Police officers who are working the beat deserve better pay. They deserve better secondary employment opportunities, to be quite frank. There's a lot of fat to be cut out of the administration of the police department. I don't know where it goes. I can see an overall budget, but you'd have to conduct a forensic audit to figure out like who's getting all these contracts and what they're being used for. But the second thing we have to think about is how we can integrate the idea of public safety into the other areas of public service delivered by the city. How do we integrate the budget and the perspective of public safety into our public health, into our housing? And where are there opportunities for us to shift some of that funding to strengthen some of those other programs? So absolutely, I believe that there may be additional fat within the police department that can be redirected to other public service programs without interfering with the livelihood of the hardworking union folks within the police department, because this is not about disabling hardworking folks. This is about making sure we get public safety right and make sure that we're putting our spending where it needs to be. I don't see the benefit necessarily of facial recognition technology, and but I do see a lot of risks. I'm a Facebook user, and I can't tell you how often Facebook tells me that I've been, there's a picture of me that I can opt into being tagged in. And so I think that facial recognition technology is by virtue of itself racist. I think that it's difficult for the way that it's programmed to differentiate, particularly people of color, from one another. And I think that it can be dangerous. I also recognize that there are people in the community that support programs like Greenlight because it makes us feel safer. But I just haven't seen any data that would support that. And I'd be willing to look at the data. I'd be willing to hear the perspectives of those who support that program and figure out how we can accommodate the feeling of safety without violating the protections and the privacies of and the benefit of the doubt that people should be receiving in the community.
What's your position on the repayment of residents who have been overassessed and overpaid property taxes?
And it's sad to say that this is just one issue in a sea of many. Detroiters have been overpaying and overtaxed and overextended and oversubsidizing the lives of all those around us. This is not something that's new. So the travesty of the $600 million, I believe it is, overassessment in taxes over I'm not even sure what the time frame was. And there are some folks who've lost their homes because of it. And there's no easy answer to it. So I think that we have to be figuring out how we can lean on the support of our friends at the state level. I think that we have to be tapping into the philanthropic community. I mean, I understand that Dan Gilbert recently announced a large gift over 10 years, and I'm curious about why. After the last State of the City address, when the current mayor announced that there's nothing we could do about the overassessments, and it's that's money that's already spent. I'm curious about why, when our friend Dan Gilbert announced that he was going to be when he announced his spending over the next 10 years, why that wasn't a piece of the package. But I do think that there's room to be partnering with corporations who are receiving a lot from this city. As I said, we're subsidizing the corporations, the businesses, the employment of a lot of folks who are around Detroit. We're providing the buildings. We're giving the tax rebates. We're giving the tax breaks for tens of thousands of people to come into Detroit for employment. And I think that the corporations owe the people of the city something. And I don't think it's too much to ask corporations and other parties to step in to figure out how we can make people who've been harmed in all these processes whole.
What do you see as the future of Detroit?
I think that the future of Detroit is Wakanda. I think that we can be a major attraction for innovators and investors and great thinkers and artists all over the country. I think we just have to put out the welcome mat and let them know that we're open for business and that we want them here. And I'm talking specifically about the great Black and brown minds of the country. We're looking after, in particular, after the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, people are looking for safe places that we can call home. I think Detroit can be that place. I think we have to set up shop and say Detroit is the Mecca, and you're welcome here. Jay-Z, Beyonce, Meek Mills, we're waiting for you to come join Harper Hill and get you a big house. Or is his name Hill Harper? I never understand people with two first names or two last names. Yeah. So, but welcome, Hill. You're here, and he's pulled made a record number of permit pulls and spent a lot of money. He said he didn't know if he wants that honor or not, but I'm glad that he's here, and I hope that other people will follow suit and set up shop here and attract others, and we can be that great powerhouse that Detroit is.
Why should Detroiters vote for you?
Detroiters should vote for me because voting for me is voting for yourself. I live next door to you. I grew up with you. You watched me grow up. You raised me. You whooped me when my mother didn't see what I was doing wrong. And everything that I was taught by the folks who live here, and everything that I continue to pass and pay forward to those who come behind me, is very much Detroit. I embody the values of Detroit. I understand what it is to live in a Detroit neighborhood. I live in a Detroit neighborhood. I'm from Joy Road. I live on Schoolcraft. I'm an organizer in my community. We're pillars, my family. People know who we are. They trust us. And I think that the rest of Detroit can trust that we're going to extend that trustworthiness to all the families represented here.